Number 1. Israel is currently triggering an absolute global media storm as international analysts debate whether it ranks as the most socially and economically contradictory nation of 2026. This is a land where ancient biblical laws clash directly with cutting-edge tech monopolies, creating an intense network of legal workarounds, gray markets, and social paradoxes. While millions of people around the world view this territory exclusively through a lens of monolithic piety and historical conflict, the boots-on-the-ground reality reveals a deeply divided national soul. The country is fundamentally split between two urban gravity wells, located less than 50 kilometers apart. Jerusalem stands as the deeply conservative, ultra-Orthodox spiritual conscience of the state, where over 75% of the Jewish population identifies as religious or traditional. Meanwhile, Tel Aviv has evolved into a hyper-secular liberal global commercial hub affectionately dubbed a modern-day Sin City. In Tel Aviv, the arrival of the sacred Jewish Sabbath is celebrated not with quiet prayer, but by the commencement of massive beach parties and crowded electronic music nightclubs. The religious demographic in the coastal metropolis has collapsed so drastically over the last 2 decades that more than 100 historic synagogues have permanently closed their doors due to inactivity. This stark polarization forces us to ask a critical question. How does a single nation manage to function when its economic engine room completely rejects the foundational rules of its spiritual capital? If you want to understand how modern societies survive when their core values are split entirely in two, hit the subscribe button as we uncover the hidden mechanisms keeping this parallel reality afloat. Number 2. The secular metropolis of Tel Aviv fights for its cultural survival by partying, creating a round-the-clock lifestyle that serves as a shock to anyone expecting uniform religious restriction. This city operates under a separate social contract, locally referred to as the State of Tel Aviv, completely detached from the conservative weight of Jerusalem. The starkest manifestation of this cultural independence is Tel Aviv's rise as the self-proclaimed vegan capital of the world. Over 5% of the total national population now identifies as strictly vegan, with Tel Aviv hosting more than 400 certified plant-based kitchens. This massive food revolution was actually accelerated by a bizarre paradox involving ancient kosher dietary laws. Because traditional religious rules mandate a strict absolute separation between meat and dairy products, the local population has been culturally conditioned for generations to meticulously inspect food labels and seek out dairy alternatives. This made the transition to a purely plant-based lifestyle completely intuitive for the secular youth. The movement has become so thoroughly institutionalized that even the national military now accommodates over 10,000 active vegan soldiers. The defense forces officially supply these troops with synthetic leather combat boots, wool-free berets, and specialized plant-based nutritional rations in military mess halls. It is a stunning cultural reality where a dietary choice born from secular progressive values utilizes the infrastructure of ancient religious laws to reshape a modern military complex. Number 3. The scythe Saturdays that freeze public infrastructure across the nation expose the raw power that Orthodox religious factions still wield over daily life. The Jewish Sabbath, or Shabbat, begins every single Friday evening at sunset and lasts until Saturday evening, triggering a mandatory legal and structural shutdown of public life. Across the vast majority of the country, public buses, trains, and government offices completely cease operations. For an uninitiated tourist or a secular worker without a private vehicle, this creates a massive logistical paralysis, effectively trapping people in their immediate neighborhoods for 24 hours. In Jerusalem, this weekly freeze is observed with absolute spiritual gravity, transforming the city into a quiet stone monument. Secular residents have increasingly felt squeezed out by this religious coercion, triggering a massive domestic migration wave where younger, non-observant families are fleeing to the coast, leaving the spiritual capital further consolidated under Orthodox control. If you happen to find yourself living in a city where public transport was legally outlawed for one full day every single week, would you adapt to the forced rest, or would you pack bags and move away? Tell us how you would handle this structural shutdown in the comments below. Number 4. The marriage loophole in the clouds represents one of the most brilliant bureaucratic scapegoats ever engineered by a secular population living under a religious monopoly. Because the national government relies heavily on coalition partnerships with ultra-Orthodox political parties, Israel has never passed a law allowing civil marriage within its borders. All domestic marriages must be legally performed by state-recognized clerical authorities, meaning there is no secular option. This archaic system makes it completely impossible for interfaith couples, same-sex partners, or secular citizens who refuse religious subjection to legally wed inside their own country. Historically, thousands of couples had to spend thousands of US dollars flying to Cyprus or Prague to get married, because the state is bound by international law to recognize valid foreign marriages. However, a tech-driven revolution changed everything when couples discovered they could apply for a marriage license from the state of Utah in the United States. By conducting a digital ceremony over a Zoom video call with an American official and receiving an official apostilled certificate, couples are now getting legally married right from their living rooms. The National Supreme Court recently issued a landmark ruling ordering the Domestic Population Authority to fully register these digital Utah weddings. This effectively rendered the orthodox domestic monopoly obsolete through a simple internet connection. Number 5. The chained women of Orthodox law represent the darkest and most heartbreaking consequence of allowing ancient religious courts to govern modern family dynamics. Because divorce is controlled exclusively by traditional rabbinical tribunals, a Jewish marriage cannot be legally dissolved unless the husband voluntarily presents his wife with a physical bill of divorce, known traditionally as a get. If a husband vanishes, suffers from severe cognitive incapacitation, or simply refuses to grant the document out of pure malice, the woman becomes an agana, which translates literally to a chained woman. These women are legally trapped in a marital limbo for years or even decades. They cannot remarry under domestic law, and if they have children with a new partner, those children are illegally branded as outcasts and forbidden from marrying mainstream citizens. This systemic vulnerability leaves hundreds of women subjected to intense emotional and financial blackmail, where estranged husbands demand tens of thousands of US dollars or full custody of property in exchange for their freedom. While civil activist groups run underground support networks and lobby for sanctions against non-compliant husbands, the fundamental legal structure remains completely untouched, leaving human rights completely subservient to ancient theological jurisprudence. Number 6. The billion-dollar empire of fake casinos highlights a jaw-dropping economic hypocrisy where a nation outlaws gambling locally while bankrolling a global digital betting powerhouse. Under national penal law, all forms of physical and online real money casinos are strictly prohibited within the country. Yet, through an extraordinary legal loophole, the state has become a global headquarters for the development of social casino games. Tech giants operating out of hypermodern skyscrapers generate billions of US dollars by creating digital slot machines, poker apps, and virtual roulette wheels. These applications exploit a specific legal definitions test because players use real money to purchase virtual chips but can never cash out real-world currency, only winning more digital playtime. The psychological mechanism of addiction remains completely identical to a real casino, allowing these tech conglomerates to harvest massive profits from global users while remaining completely immune to domestic anti-gambling prosecution. Even when local courts approved a settlement where a major developer paid 1.5 million NES to resolve a class action lawsuit, the industry easily absorbed the cost, continuing to play for time and delaying binding judicial precedents while generating massive tax revenues for the state. Number 7. The dangerous sinkholes, reclaiming the lowest point on Earth, serve as a violent geographic warning that human environmental exploitation is triggering a catastrophic collapse. The Dead Sea, sitting at more than 430 meters below sea level, is currently evaporating at an alarming rate of more than 1 meter every single year. This environmental disaster is driven by the fact that upstream nations divert nearly all the natural freshwater inflows for agricultural irrigation, while massive industrial chemical factories pump out the remaining brine to extract valuable minerals. As the hypersaline water recedes, fresh water from underground aquifers rushes in to fill the void, dissolving the subterranean salt layers beneath the coastline. This creates sudden, volatile subterranean collapses, opening up more than 7,000 massive sinkholes along the shores. Entire holiday resorts, major public highways, and agricultural fields have been abruptly swallowed up by the earth, transforming once flourishing tourist beaches into a hazardous, crater-filled lunar wasteland that is completely closed to the public. It is a striking visual reminder that even the most historically fortified landscapes can be utterly dismantled when economic greed overrides ecological balance. Number 8. the Holy Land's defiant pork farms showcase a fascinating cultural loophole where a profound religious taboo is systematically bypassed to feed a secular culinary market. The consumption of pork is one of the most powerful and enduring taboos in both Judaism and Islam, leading the state to pass the strict pig-raising prohibition law. This legislation legally bans the breeding, keeping, and slaughter of pigs across the vast majority of the national territory. However, the law contains a highly specific geographical exception, permitting pig farming exclusively within a handful of historic Christian-majority villages in the northern region. To satisfy the massive culinary demand of secular citizens and the large wave of Eastern European immigrants who arrived in the 1990s, domestic farmers have optimized these localized enclaves into hyper-intensive agricultural operations. The animals are raised on elevated wooden platforms to technically avoid touching the sacred soil, exploiting the literal wording of the law. This creates a highly lucrative domestic supply chain that feeds a vibrant, defiant network of non-kosher delicatessens and urban restaurants, proving that consumers' demand will always find a way to navigate around state-enforced morality. Number 9. The paradox of the world's vegan capital reveals how a society can simultaneously champion progressive environmentalism while remaining deeply entangled in high-tech warfare and global espionage. While international visitors flock to the coastal tech hubs to experience the pinnacle of progressive, plant-based living and social tolerance, the state's primary economic and geopolitical export relies heavily on weaponized technology. The Ministry of Defense tightly controls and licenses elite domestic cyber arms firms that develop highly invasive spyware capable of infiltrating smartphones worldwide without a single click. The government has historically utilized these sophisticated digital weapons as a form of de facto diplomatic currency, granting software licenses to foreign regimes to forge strategic security alliances and facilitate major regional diplomatic breakthroughs. This creates a jarring moral dichotomy where the exact same urban neighborhood can produce an idealistic green startup dedicated to saving the planet, alongside an ultra-secretive cyber intelligence firm whose products are monitored heavily by international human rights organizations. Number 10. The conscription crisis shattering national unity has brought the state to the absolute brink of a constitutional meltdown, exposing the ultimate socioeconomic fault line in modern society. Since the founding of the modern state, ultra-Orthodox men studying in religious seminaries were granted a sweeping collective exemption from mandatory military service. However, as the National Defense Forces face severe unprecedented manpower shortages due to a prolonged, multi-front regional conflict, the secular and religious Zionist populations who bear the overwhelming burden of frontline combat have demanded an absolute end to this privilege. The Supreme Court recently issued an absolute mandate ordering the immediate draft of eligible Orthodox students, triggering an explosive wave of civil disobedience. Thousands of Orthodox men have flooded the major national highways, setting up massive blockades, clashing violently with mounted riot police, and chanting that they would rather die than enlist. This existential internal conflict threatens to completely paralyze the ruling political coalition, proving that the greatest threat to a highly fortified nation might not be external adversaries, but the total collapse of its internal social contract. Finally, the eternal friction of good and gold provides a profound global lesson on the limits of modernization and the resilience of human tribalism. It demonstrates that a society can achieve the absolute pinnacle of technological advancement, wealth accumulation, and artificial intelligence integration, yet remain completely bound by the gravitational pull of ancient religious dogmas and cultural identities. The legal loopholes, digital weddings, and geographic bypasses we have uncovered are not temporary glitches in the system, but rather the essential survival mechanisms of a deeply life-fragmented population trying to live simultaneously in the ancient past and the hyper-advanced future. It forces us to realize that as our world becomes increasingly urbanized and automated, the primal human need for spiritual identity and sectarian loyalty does not simply vanish. It merely evolves into new and unexpected forms of resistance. If you want to continue exploring the hidden realities and dark paradoxes of nations across the globe, click on our next deep dive investigation right now. The information is for reference only, so please do your own research before making any decisions.